And we have to understand, as we become teachers ourselves, that really, as I've often said, the word teacher is synonymous with the word threat. Try waking somebody up from their delirium and you will soon find that you're a threat. Try even talking about, fluoride in the toothpaste. Or don't have your children vaccinated with hundreds of vaccines, and you're going to find that you're immediately a threat, even amongst the people that are closest to you. And we don't want to have that clear vision that the teacher is trying to bring us to, or the shaman is trying. No, we want to edit. So when a lot of people are saying, look, I live in a harmonious world, I don't see any of this stuff going on, I'm looking for peace, love, and harmony. What they really mean is that they're editing out the ugliness so that they can be in that one season world. But the man who's using his whole mind doesn't do that. And then say, oh, I'm living in Shangri-La, because they've beautifully, carefully, and methodically edited out the ugly side of life. They're unintegrated souls. Now what we want to look at is this question that I go to very much in the Atlantis book, which deals not only with the origins of evil, but with the origins of the ego itself. Our waking consciousness, the thing we use every day when we wake up. In the book, we read about the deep and intense emotional and psychological trauma experienced by the survivors of the genetic interference, the flood, and the later pole shift. And we can argue amongst ourselves forever of which of those was the more traumatic. I think it was the first one, but boy, oh boy, the rest are pretty bad as well. And I contend that the ego of man, the center of his waking consciousness, may be of recent origins, coming about as an artificial center of consciousness due to this horrific trauma. The ego is a reaction to offset total and rapid psychic breakdown, the effects of which are still being felt. But because its birth was traumatic, its nature and behavior is necessarily vexatious, problematic, narcissistic, and violent. And the history of man is the record of ego existence. The ego is the one writing its own memoirs, which we call history. Now when the ego wanes in power, history ends, meaning that if the ego in fact was born 13,500 years ago to replace the consciousness which was massively traumatized, then it also rises to its peak and comes to a wane. Now, what am I talking about before that? Before that we had holarchic thinking. We were directly plugged into the matrix. We used the whole brain. But when you're having visitors come here and mess with your DNA, and that's followed by worldwide deluge and worldwide polar shift, the horrendous trauma of that basically destroyed the kind of consciousness that we had at that time, and it fractured. And just in the same way that when you're about to hit a vehicle in your car, or you're about to fall because you've slipped on the ice, a muscle becomes spastic. In order to what? To prop you up so that you don't completely fall. So in consciousness there was this reaction. You have to think of consciousness or the ego in this term. It's not a very good metaphor, but it'll do. In order to offset total collapse, the ego was born. And you see this story actually in the first two cards of the major arcana of the tarot. The fool and the magician are the two aspects of this ego that came in. And see, the ego is very proud. Now that it did save us, it's one who wants to walk around in flowing robes. It's going, give me complete obedience. Hey, I saved your ass. The ego has done a great deal of job, a great deal of work. Now it's the center of consciousness, so to speak. And it's very limited. It's like a sort of an officious office manager. Well, of course it's going to be like that. The executives are out to lunch. The spirit is not with us. So who's running the corporation? The janitor. It's like the guy at the lodge house now thinks he's the lord of the manor. The butler is trying on the clothes of the master when he's away. That's the predicament that we're in right now. When the executives return, the ego will be perfectly happy to just, stay silent and be thanked for its wonderful work. But until that time, we're stuck with it. So the ego, what we are doing our thinking with, is of incredible importance to discover something about it. Because it's artificial. It has a birthday. But this idea that we are creatures of trauma, physiological trauma, that then creates psychological trauma, has been picked up by certain scholars. Tally Kellogg emphasizes the fact that abusive behaviors, whether we direct them towards ourselves, other people, or other species, are not natural to human beings. People enact such behaviors, he says, because something unnatural has happened to them. I and they have become deranged. Now, the schizophrenia was studied by two major people. Two major scholars are experts in schizophrenia. One is your American, Julian Jaynes, and the other is the eccentric psychologist from England, who's now passed away, R.D. Laing. But Julian Jaynes, Jack Barringer in his book Past Shock says of Jaynes, Jaynes claimed that this period, thousands of years ago, was a time of intense psychosis for the emerging human race. Terence McKenna picks up on it and says that James has suggested that human consciousness has changed its character even in recent historical times. The ego as we know it was not really in existence except under extreme stress. These are scientists who've discovered this through their testing of people. And then it presented itself almost as an exterior intrusion into consciousness, like the voice of a god. Of course, these scholars don't tell you what the trauma was. I do. I know what the trauma was, and it was so severe that consciousness as we know it was shattered forever. Except in a few genius types who have a little bit of access, like voices from the distance, like echoes from the past, are the great geniuses of our time. But most of us, no, it's very, very, and of course we live in a world, make sure we're going to be conditioned into this hyper-linear, very, very hyper-focused left brain type of mentality. David Watson, in his book Pathology of Civilization, says that we reproduce catastrophe because we ourselves are traumatized, both as a species and individually, beginning at birth. Because we are wounded, we have put up psychic defenses against reality and have become so cut off from direct participation in the multidimensional wilderness in which we are embedded that all we can do is to navigate our way cautiously through a humanly designed day-to-day substitute world of symbols, a world of dollars, minutes, numbers, images, and words that are constantly being manipulated to wring the most possible profit from every conceivable circumstance. The body and the spirit both rebel. Of course they rebel. But we were so traumatized that we kind of now have a fear of nature, heavily co-opted by the media, by the way. But we have a bit of a suspicion of that old nature because from one point of view, it seemed to do wrong by us. Our earth was just being destroyed under our feet like the worst Charlton Heston disaster movie you've ever seen. My goodness. So after that, you see, the ego could say, no, you trust me. Forget all of that stuff. You listen to me. I'm the way shore. I'm the light holder. I'm the one who leads you to security and stability. And we were so traumatized, we've done it. But look at the effects of that now. Now, R.D. Laing says that's something incredible. As a psychologist, he turned the whole of psychology upside down. He said, insanity is a perfectly natural adjustment to a totally unnatural and negative environment. It's just an adjustment like anything else. If your world is irrational and insane, and you're doing your best to adjust to it, but the result is insanity, don't blame the schizoid person. Schizophrenia is an adjustment, like all mental disease, and even like crime. It's merely a symptom, so don't treat the symptom. Schizophrenia is coined by Eugene Bleuler, and it roughly translates as shattered mind, coming from the Greek schizo, to split or to divide. But remember, these psychotic states are just a compensation. They're a desperate attempt to find a sanity. And the whole human race has been doing it, not just individuals. The psychosis is globalized. But Gnostics would always say, hey, we know all about that. We know about the troublesome ego. Thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago, we have the Gnostics who said, yes, that's Lucifer. That's the God that, thinks he's God. That's not the real God. That's what they call the demiurge, the king of the world, Rex Mundi. That's your problem. They knew that. I prefer to use more simple language and get this message through to people. Let's stop thinking that we think with the mind. Let's get around the idea that we think for the mind. Get out of the idea that the ego, the mind, the thing you think your thoughts with, is unique to yourself. That's a luxury. But it's also a lie, by the way. We're thinking for the mind, not with it. Your great Alan Watts, he said, we seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent, but which were given to us by our society. We copy emotional reactions from our parents. Society is our extended mind and body. Absolutely, he's right. Well, your name is borrowed, your religion is borrowed, your clothes are borrowed, your ideas are borrowed. Tell me what's unique. Every human being can clearly know what it is that makes them the same as everybody else. We all support the same team. We all vote the same way. We all like such and such. Very few people can tell you what really makes them unique. We belong to schools where they couldn't care less what makes you unique, unless it serves the beast, of course. Then they're very interested. As Alan Watts said, the most strongly enforced of all known taboos is the taboo against knowing who and what you really are behind the mask of your apparently separate, independent, and isolated ego. The taboo against knowing who you are You mean to tell me we're going to reach 25 years of age, voting age, working age, and marriage age, but we don't know who we all are? Wonderful. That's great. And then we turn around wondering why the world is in the state it's in. Marvelous. So we address this problem. That we know that there's untold cruelty from the earliest times. From James Hillman, the Canadian psychologist and friend of Carl Jung, he said that archaeology supports the view that warfare is a development of only the past 10,000 years. Oh, that's a blink of the eye, 10,000 years. Of course, it ties into research of people like myself who are saying, well, we were visited. We were genetically tampered with. And now these psychologists and even some of the scientists are starting to back that up. Because I very much believe that, believe me, these penchants for violence, they're not something that's natural to human beings at all. As I've always said, the question of evil is one of the most important questions that we could ever ask. It's number one on the list. Erich Fromm, the post-Neo-Freudian, says that the detailed description of the life of primitive hunters and food gatherers has shown that man, at least since he fully emerged 50,000 years ago, was most likely not the brutal, destructive, cruel being, and hence not the prototype of man the killer that we find in more developed stages of his evolution. So there's another lie out the door. Oh, well, we're violent because, that's just the way it is. It's evolution. No, it's not evolution. And that big question that so many people have asked, sitting around the coffee table, but the scientists are asking it. The malcontents are asking it. What is the real difference between man and beast? The only thing I say to that is, do we really want the answer? I mean, really. Because man does differ from the animal by the fact that he is the killer. He, the only primate that kills and tortures members of his own species without any reason, either biological or economic, and who feels satisfaction in doing so. Animals will eat each other, but they don't murder each other. It is this biologically non-adaptive and non-phylogenetically programmed malignant aggression, okay, because there's healthy forms of aggression as well. But this is malignant aggression that constitutes the real problem and danger to man's existence as a species. Don't we know it? And I've always thought it's interesting that the word sanity comes from the same word roots as sanitize, meaning that if you're not sanitized, you're not sane. What do I mean by that? We clean everything in our world. We wouldn't dream of eating off the same dirty plates twice. We make our beds, we take showers, we clean the driveway, right? In Ireland, they're out there polishing their cars on Sunday morning, groom the dog. Everything in our life is clean. How come not our emotions? How come they're as toxic as hell and we're walking around loose in the world thinking, we got problems, let me fix it? Ever try cleaning a nice clean window with an oily rag and then saying you can't see the garden? Well, the oily rag in your hand is the one messing up the window. So if we're finding disorder and chaos in the world, could it be our smudge, our forensic mess that we're leaving behind? Now, we don't have too much insight into the sane mind, but we can certainly recognize the unsane mind. At least that much we can do. But in short, the schizophrenic mind creates a schizogenic society. You don't need to be Freud to know that. The pathological mind creates a pathogenic society. The toxic mind sees and creates a toxic world. And we can recognize it on the big scale. But can you recognize it closer to home? Actually, no, we can't. Barbara Hahn Clow in her Palladian Agenda says, you all have miasmas in your bodies that you must release. These are etheric masses that hold memory from genetic past lives. They're disease patterns. And we feel uncomfortable with them. It's time to get rid of them. But we really don't want to do that. We escape from it. That's right, avoidance and tranquilization. We don't want to do all that psychology and self-investigation. Where's the authority figures who will just lead us where we need to go? They'll teach us all how to do it. But don't you see that by your avoidance to deal with your dark psychic content, that you are in fact funding and permitting the most hideous leviathans to poison and intoxicate the human race? Because they will step on to the white square of the chessboard if you don't occupy it. Then don't blame them for their existence if you have allowed them to rise. Carl Jung said that the foundation of mental illness, all mental illness, is unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. Because we resist a certain amount of this looking at the dark side, especially of ourselves, and a willing entrance into, because remember, all of us are going through the dark night of the soul, and we'll have to go through this underworld phase, just as the sun has to go through its one seasonally. You're not going to escape it. The only difference is that you can either decide to do it of your own free will, then it's ritualistic, or you can be dragged. The hanged man has a smile on his lips. It's a willing oblation. Did not Odin, when he hung on the tree of life in order to learn the secret of the runes, he did it willingly. Nobody forced Buddha to sit down in front of the tree when he wanted to contemplate the meaning of life. It's a Conan and the Barbarian situation. You must willingly be crucified and die to be reborn again. Of course, we've forgotten all of those rituals, but nevertheless it goes through your life. It's not that suffering is good. Suffering is inbuilt into the universe. You're going to have it just like you have pleasure. It's your unwillingness, unwholesome unwillingness to deal with it and to accept it for what it is, which is like the sword saying, I don't want to go through the fire of the blacksmith. Well, then you're not a sword, period. Now, you see, in the schemata of the consciousness, we're out here. We're out here in the realm of persona, which is the word for mask. We're out here in the Hollywood drama, right? The mask, the show of masks. And we become so identified with this extreme edge of consciousness, the fashions, what are we going to look like, appearances, and the whole 9 yards. Now, of course, a certain amount of persona we need. Otherwise, we'll be wide open to attack. You need the mask in order to conceal your real identity, to protect yourself and generally, and to operate in the world with other fellow human beings. But we have way overcompensated for it. We've put all our psychic energy into the mask. And you only have to look at the cosmetic commercials to know that it's obsessive right now. Behind that is the ego, the waking consciousness. And this little battery runs down every 12 hours or so you need to sleep. That's because it's finite and it's energy, and you need to sleep to restore its energy. When we wake up in the morning, we have a thing called ego consciousness, ego waking consciousness. But the ego is a strange kind of thing. As I said, it's kind of young and reckless and wild, as well as very domineering. And anything that your ego or you do not like about yourself, you repress. And the repressions of all the stuff that you despise about yourselves becomes what's known as the shadow personality. And it's kind of in the unconscious realm. It's not even in the conscious realm because you're not aware of it. It's like the director's cut of your life. See, when you're living your life and experiencing all sorts of things, you want to have the nice clips that you cut out and put them on the coffee table, the family album. But what about the backstory that's really been filmed, that footage that you hide away, that one day when you leave this planet is going to be played for you in the dark room? They're going to say, come this way. We've got something to show you. Remember all that film you stored away in the attic, meaning your unconscious mind? We're going to run you an amazing film here. This is a real slasher horror one. This is Stephen King and more. You want to see the John Carpenter, Friday the 13th, part 14? Here it is. The shadow is the repressed stuff that we don't show to the world, and we even forget. Now, for those who find it hard to understand what repression is, it's forgetting something and then forgetting that you forgot about it. It's the skeletons in the closet. And again, it's a very necessary part of the human mind. We need it to survive. It's like the dumpster. You need to throw the trash out. But we've, again, overcompensated. We're doing it too much. And it causes enormous psychic problems. Carl Jung said that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. For no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. He's talking spiritually there. He's saying that for you to be integrated, you're going to need to integrate with your shadow, because those are aspects of yourself that you've thrown away. And you're not getting to the light. See, the self, the true person, is way back here. For the hell, you can forget about the self. We're into ego world. And the ego is doing itself a disservice by constantly denying aspects of its own self. Now, you know something? There was books left out of the Bible, and it's important to start finding out why. Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, this is one of the great Gnostic Gospels that was thrown away, when you see your likeness, you rejoice. But when you see your images which come into existence before you, which neither die nor are made manifest, how much will you bear? Now, it's very flowery language, a different language, but can you see now what is being said here? When you see your likeness, you rejoice. Meaning when you're in the persona, and you're in the world of, oh, I play the fashion game and everybody then gives me acknowledgement and I give acknowledgement, you rejoice. But when you see the primordial images which come into existence before you, but these which are neither die or are made manifest, meaning the unconscious mind, how much then will you bear? It's an old story. And the teacher, remember, the threat. You know what the teacher does? He goes, project on me. Come on, dump it on me. And we do. And the teacher's job is to take all of that. As Carlos Castaneda and other writers have shown. The teacher is, he's the guy we're going to bury in the sand, as we've done so many times before. The shadow is very powerful. It is a moral problem. It destroys relationships, and it destroys the teacher relationship with the one who's receiving the teaching. Yeah, looking at who we are, it's all it's about. The only solution is to look at who we are. As Alexander Pope said, know then thyself. Presume not God the scan. The proper study of man is man. William Blake said, thine own humanity learn to adore. But Carl Jung put it this way. He said, look, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop from facing their souls. Ever been outside recently? Ever turned on the TV recently? He's exactly right. People will do anything, no matter how absurd. And all that carnival that you see out there and all the distraction and nonsense that this world is wall to wall full of, that's what he's talking about. I must live in the Bahamas. I must live in a one-season world. I don't want to be looking at any of that stuff. Well, then okay. But then you've just condemned the world to horrors. You're just making a person in your life, your partner or your children, the victims, the slaves to your inability to face yourself. You're now having a person fill your void and your emptiness because you're not a whole person. And now you've enslaved that wife or that husband or that child or that animal or your workmates to your own form of tyranny. Yeah, you can't call the police on it, and you'll never get the court over it to prove that it's there, but it's there. And basically, repression doesn't work. There's a thing known as the return of the repressed. You can only dump so much of it before the stench starts to, come back. And as Carl Jung said in a well-known statement, he said, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside of you as fate. Ha, ha, ha. Because there's a strange contract between the unconscious energy of our minds and the world, the energy that built the world. They conspire together. They're built out of the same stuff. So behind the back of the ego, the unconscious mind, the shadow, conspires with life, with material existence, to bring in front of you the very people, the very person, the very challenges, right? To help you integrate when you won't do it of your own free will. And we call that living. All the stuff that happens around us that we often describe as difficult challenges, that's what that is. We will refuse to do the homework, so then we're going to meet it in space and time. As the Greek said, your character is your fate. If we do not autonomously cleanse our psyches and strive to live morally, and if we continue to violate the natural order, remember I said nature goes through these cycles, it can handle the winter when everything dies and putrefies, because it knows what beautiful roses are going to come from that. Nature can do it, but we can't. And if we continue to violate the natural order because of our inner emotional and psychological toxicity, we will allow the ego to manifest surrogate channels to exorcise its repressions and other negative debris. In short, if we give up the right rulership of the self, we inevitably breed Orwellian political and religious tyrants to take over the job and turn us into what George Simmel, the psychologist, sociologist, said, smiling depressives, or worse. And there's two other proclivities, capacities that we have in our minds. In our ego consciousness, we also have two very important things. And again, both necessary, but we've taken them to extremes. And they're called projection and inflation. And the place where we can really examine them is in our relationships. The dark aspects of the personal psyche, which threaten the ego's autonomy and its vision of itself, are repressed, as we said. The shadow is the sum of all that we loathe about ourselves, and we project it onto other people and say they're responsible. This content is subconsciously projected onto others who become our external representatives of our personal shadow selves. In extreme cases, we also project this content through the field of other oblivious victims. That's an important one, but we're not going to get into it now. And additionally, there is the collective psyche and its dark content, which is at certain times likewise projected. So you do it with your individual mind, but we all do it collectively at certain phases in history. We literally all project on the famous nemesis that's created for us. And the politicians, they know how to manipulate that. We want the easy way out, and they have the pulse on the psyche, and they know how to help us with that kind of false exorcism. They're experts at it. As I said, when we are not integrated, strong, and healthy psychologically, we invariably turn to external representatives. The parents, the politicians, the teachers, the evangelists, the heroes, the authority figures, the establishment representatives, whoever. And all manner of horrors have arisen because we do this. So yes, our world is full of horror and genocide and mayhem. Let's start discovering why. And the one I'm most concerned with and thinking about the most is known as the animus, which is a Latin word for the Father, or more colloquially, Big Daddy. Very important archetype that make up ego consciousness. And very, very prevalent in the world. Big Daddy is what it's known as. And it has the most important effect. As we understand what our egos are doing, we'll understand why we create. Now, of course, we know that what is Big Daddy? It's nothing more than a re-scripting of the old Jehovah. I mean, this is an old deal we're talking about here. Now, look at the relationship of Jehovah to the so-called chosen people. It wasn't because they, wove the great tapestries, or they made the best sandals, or that they built great empires, or made great jewelry, or great lovers of women, or whatever. What was the reason why Jehovah was protecting, loving, and adoring the chosen people? One word. They were obedient. The relationship between the Father and the Son, you see, is one of obedience. That's what gets you the power and security that the Father offers you. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. The Bible is telling you about the animus. The Bible is telling you what God and this Father figure is. It's belligerent. Remember, you're going to it because you want protection, because you have no security inside yourself. And it's going to do its number. It's going to do its dance. Don't blame it. It's doing what it was paid to do. Paid with psychological energy. There's one other important psychological complex that we need to look at, and that's called identification. And we all do it. You have to identify with your heroes and things, otherwise, you couldn't survive. Identification is that you identify with your parents and the good side of, your heroes and so on and so forth. So it's a natural, healthy drive. But again, it's taken to extremes in certain situations. The extreme of it is known as the identification with the object of one's hate. The identification with the object of one's hate? Meaning you hate something, but you identify with it? Why would you do that? Now, when states and people are unhealthy and not sovereign, they give their power away to demagogues and champions who possess the ability to lead them anywhere. The slave has an ambivalent relationship with the master. He may despise the master, but he may also envy him and need his attention and affection, because we do need. We are in dependence. You are a slave of the approval and the needs of others, and if you don't have it, look what happens to you. Now, the slave has an inferiority complex and does not think or act for himself. In fact, he prefers that others do the thinking for him. In return for this, he offers service, work, and above all, obedience. It's the master versus slave. Now, see, of course, hate is in the eyes of both. The whole relationship is based on hate. But the slave is thinking, well, this guy can kill me. So, instead of death, slavery, death. All right, done deal, slavery. Just give me a few cushions every time, once in a while for my prison cell. And a little salt in my bowl of gruel, and I'm happy. Give me chains of iron instead of gold, and hey, brother, go and do whatever you want. Go and murder and mutilate in my name. I don't care. I'm happy. Glenn Parton said, "We have internalized our masters," which is a well-known psychological response to trauma. See, trauma again. When faced with the overwhelming terror, haven't we heard that word recently? Quite a lot. The human mind splits, with part of itself modeling itself after the oppressor. It is an act of appeasement. Look, you're saying, I'm like you, so don't harm me. Simply called identification. Identification with the object of one's hate. Here's a couple of extreme examples of it, because this thing takes many forms. A female, in fact, identification complex is very much in the female, is an aspect of the female psyche. Here's two extreme examples of it to make the point. Say, for instance, you have a very ambivalent relationship with the father, because the father, and rightly so, the father has in fact wounded you at some point in your youth. And you have a primal wound created by the father left, the father hurt you, whatever. It happens. You hate the father immensely for the wrong that he did, and you should. That hate is perfectly legitimate. But if you hate the father too much, it will often prevent a woman from integrating in society, because the father is also the boss, you see, the senior, the state, the system. So your hate for your father prevents you from winning in the world. So then the ego now has to think, well, how do I make a compensation? So what the female psyche often does is it identifies with the object of its hate. And here's a couple of examples of it. And this is physicalizing it, where it's a woman, but it's not really a woman, it's a man. It's a person saying, I want to be male. Because I'm in deep hatred of my father, haven't worked it out, I'm not resolving it, don't know how. But I need the attention. I need to make it in the system. And if I'm in rebellious against the Saturnian system, I'm getting nowhere. And I have a healthy drive that wants to succeed and get somewhere and have a good life. So you're in what's known as a catch-22 situation. And you resolve it in these ways that are known as sublimation. And they're extreme. It's through sublimation. And we all do this to a certain extent. You think you don't have something, or you think that you're without something, and then you find a substitute for it. This is a very powerful archetype, this identification. But there's another version of the same thing. Only we know it as rebellion. It's the opposite side of the coin. It's like, hey, I'm not playing into all of that. I hate the father and the system and all that bogus stuff. Going to school, getting up in the morning, going and getting a job, all that straight up and down square stuff. You're in hatred of it, but you're not going to identify with it. You're going to say, hey, I rebel against it. Now, you can argue which is the healthier drive. I don't know. And then you had a whole culture of it here in the 60s. But see, what is rebellion really? Isn't it really the other side of the coin of the subservience? In Rome, no one complained when Caligula made his horse the emperor. That's the identification, right, with the object of one's hate. Go ahead, do whatever you want. The rebel goes, to hell with that. I will say something. But do you see that the rebellion is still isn't it dependent on the discipline, on the father? It's still tied to the actions of the father. The rebel is a healthy in a way because he's seeing the dumbed downness. He's seeing the utter control and the gaga people. They're acting like sheeple. So the rebel tries to, in his own way, as dysfunctional as it is, he's trying to say, but I don't buy into all of that. I see it as a lie. And how can you not see it as a lie? We've got a one-party system happening here. We've got blustering maniacs who are going to push it down everybody's throat with lie upon lie upon lie. Because you see, look, they say, look, you want to live in a box where you can hear the toilet flushing next door and with some slumlord, we can accommodate you. You want to pay through the nose for a useless car, we can accommodate you. You want to go ahead and live in a dead-end, get yourself a dead-end job in which you're stuck in scale labor for the rest of your life, the system can absolutely accommodate you. You want to buy into a false lie and believe a lie after lie after lie to cover the other lies, we absolutely can accommodate you. You want to live in a world where you have a political system of tyrants where you can vote for them to go and mass murder, we can accommodate you. But if you want to live in a world where you're independent and you have a healthy system, we can't accommodate you. That's the message. So the rebel goes, then I'm out of here. I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing. You see, so it's semi-healthy. You get a medal for knowing what you don't want to do. As a tarot reader or as a diviner, as an astrologer, I can tell you that most of my clients, and I'm sure this will be corroborated by anyone else who works in this field, I'm visited by so many people who absolutely have got to that point in their life where they do not know what it is that they do know what they don't want to do. Their problem is what it is that they have to do or should be doing, their destiny. Because there's all the difference in the world between that, knowing what you don't want to do, and you get a medal for that. That's great. A lot of people never even get to that stage. But the secret of life, the magic of life, is that we often don't know what it is that we want to do, and then we make the mistake of turning to authority figures to go, they're going to tell me. The trick is that only you know what it is you want. That's the whole point. And until you create it for yourself, it's not going to be there. You can model yourself on others perhaps a little bit, and browse the field. But only you can begin the process of lighting the fuse of what you need to be. Sam Peckinpah created himself. Van Gogh, Michelangelo, the whole list. You create yourself. But they've put so many bread and circuses in front of us that we are gaga. We don't even know what's happening. Think for ourselves, we can't even get that far. They're doing the thinking for us, and they can hand us whatever they want. They can even create a faux conflict and say, look, we know you're unhappy. We know you're repressed. We know you hate our guts. But you know what? We'll give you a way to do something about it. We'll create a political system, a pigsty, in which you can go in there and cluck and chip at each other, like those cockerel fights. That's what you need to do. You need to go and do that. And that'll bring us down. So they create a fake game of dialectics for us, and then we exhaust all our energy in this political pigsty created by our masters, and then wonder why nothing moves a smegging inch forward. And they're laughing, they're having a field day, they're dancing on their desks going, these chumps bought into this? Yeah, well, that's right, our forefathers only lived about 25 years of age. We've got a lot of growing to do. So that, the rebellion is healthy in a way, but never forget it is merely the other side of the coin of the problem. It's saying, I don't want to, be part of the problem anymore. But yet, as you saw in the 1960s, and as you still see, there's not too much solution stuff happening. Erich Fromm, in his Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, a book I wish everybody would read, the sick individual finds himself at home with all other similarly sick individuals. The whole culture is geared to this kind of pathology. The result is that the average individual does not experience the separateness and isolation the fully schizophrenic person feels. He feels at ease amongst those who suffer from the same deformation. In fact, it is the fully sane person who feels isolated in the insane society. And he may suffer so much from the incapacity to communicate that it is he who may become psychotic. And haven't we all experienced that? From the time we were born, I assume everyone in this room has experienced that. And I would also say this, that if you are sane enough to see the insanity, that's a damn good sign, because it means you're not insane. So as bad as it is to feel bad about the things that are happening, look at the bright side, you can see it. Man runs away from his own shadow self and has a sadistic relationship with himself and with his darker emotions, quote unquote. But, like biological white blood cells, ladies and gentlemen, these darker emotions exist to signal that something is wrong within the body politic and to let us know that we are under attack, either from ourselves or from some other external source. But where are our altars to these dark guardians? You see, your anger, your stress, your hypertension, your fear, right? All of that. These are aspects of ourselves. We've been conditioned to believe and observe them negatively. So we're in inner conflict. Because now you've got a lower part of yourself and a higher part of yourself. You're inwardly divided. Then how are you going to fix external division? Now, you see, the problem is, though, that it's like, imagine your mind is like the court of the king. You don't like it when these hideous, ragged, evil-smelling, foul-looking, wrinkled old guardians come in to tell the story of what they've seen on their travels. No, we want Don Juan and white horses and perfumery and wonderful tales of high adventure. So when these strange people come into our court and try to tell us in their croaking voices an amazing story of where they've been and what they've seen, we go, get away, anger, get away, violence, get away, all of that. And we're told not to listen to these beings. So we have an inner conflict at hand. But these are aspects of ourselves that have an amazing story to tell us about the world and about reality. We better start listening to what these guardians are saying. So we must come into a new kind of relationship with the so-called dark guardians, that part of ourselves that we do not heed. And we've been taught to censor ourselves to a pathological degree and are suffering immensely as a result. You can't live in a one-season world. You can try, but sooner or later the winter will come. And it will come too hard and then you'll be perished because you're not acclimatized to it. But this does not mean, I'm not saying that now we become all perverse and criminal. It merely means that we develop our ego maturity to heed those voices that tell us what violates our inner body politic. Your white blood cells, you couldn't live without them. When a disease or something attacks your system, they come to your help. Well, these dark guardians, especially anger, has a blue flame of anger. Watch the movie Hellboy, because that movie will teach you something about the blue flame of anger. It's a defense mechanism. Yes, if you don't integrate it, it'll become pathological and you'll find its muddy boot prints around and it won't be very pleasant. You'll be thinking, what's that smell? And look at all this mess. Yeah, because you haven't welcomed them in and cleaned them off and listened to what he has had to say under all that dust. But they're knocking to get in, going, the house is burning. Open up, let me tell you about it. You go, oh, get away, you. I call the police, get out. The state that is achieved when we cease being sadistic and punitive with ourselves, when we desist seeking the approval of others, when we free ourselves and others from the tyranny of our dependency. There are also factors involved here in the listening to these incredible parts of us. I'll just say, and I mean, as controversial as it is, and the psychologists actually should have taught you this a long time ago. And the New Age movement, that's defunct in my opinion as well. Because they have not said what I'm going to say now. And that is, you can get out of your mind any idea that anger and hate and violence have ever caused any problems on this earth. Except when they, as I said, become pathological. But actually, we better wake up and realize that not hate, not anger, not violence has ever caused any of the problems that are on this earth at all. And anyone who believes that has got a very, very limited understanding of the world that they're living in. The problems are caused in this world, ladies and gentlemen, not by those things, but by false love. Now, one of the other problems why what I'm talking about is often not, dawned on a lot of people, is because you see, cruelty to others is in fact well documented, obviously, right? The hunt for serial killers, all the movies about it, the quest for justice, all the programs. And of course, in physical cruelty, when somebody's beating somebody up or murdering, you can call physical police and you can go to court and you can get physical, in-your-face justice about it. But when it's cruelty to the self, who's going to notice? When it's sadism to the self. But my God, cruelty to the self? If you identify with the Father and the prohibitive aspects overly, then you are a walking criminal to yourself. And I am myself personally, you see, not concerned very much with the utter form of crime. I think it's interesting to study. The study will go on, and it's been recognized. We all recognize it. I am infinitely more interested in the unseen form of cruelty that each person does to their own selves, and that must be studied. If you've embodied it because your parents have been rotten, that's probably where it might originate. And they learned it from their parents and so on. But it must stop. And this sadism and necrophilia, the true meaning of the word necrophilia is connected to sadism. It's love of death. It's the thanatos. So when you're not integrating your shadow and you're buying into all this lie that we've been describing, you are basically a lover of the dead. You gain, just like when you peel a scab, you have that sort of morbid, pleasure from peeling a scab. Magnify that many, many, many times. Now there's healthy aspects of that as well. When you see the bully in the school who's pulling the pigtails of the little girl, but the teacher's been observing and then comes and gives him a whack, you get a sort of a perverse pleasure out of that, don't you? So we all have it, but in the psychotic people it's very, very enlarged. That whole feeling that they get a deep and abiding pleasure, because they have murdered their own selfhood. The person who has murdered their own femininity, or masculinity, or who have murdered their own selfhood, well, how do you think they're going to operate outside? How do you think they're going to relate to everyone else? They may have the persona so that they appear to be normal, but the person who has murdered themselves in their life cannot be expected to exist rationally. As I said, if the ego is the ghost that has arisen from the grave of the self, then expect it to act in ghoulish ways. If you leave rotten meat out, expect maggots. Don't blame the maggots. So if you see a body politic, you see, that is rotten in this way, that's why. Because the ego is ruling and the self is dead. The executives are out on holiday. So the office manager has become the king. He's a maniac. He's running around telling everybody what to do. Yes, he opens and locks the doors. He washes the floor. He's very official and he gets a lot of things done. So in fact, technically speaking, the corporation is standing. But it's a very punitive place and you don't want to work there. He's trying to save on light bills. He's bossing everybody around. So the executives have not come in. Spirit is not there. Selfhood is not there. Selfhood has been murdered. And in its place we have something else. And from that we get masochism. Masochism is nothing but sadism to the self. It's just a fancy word for sadism towards oneself. And out of that comes horrors. Your narcissism, your obesity, your bulimia, the body piercing, the drug addiction, the alcoholism. All of this is coming out of a deep and intense violence towards oneself that must end if there's ever to be change in the world. And you must develop the science of observing it, not in others, but in yourself. How do you censor yourself? From that comes the sadism that we're familiar with. The war, the rape, the murder, the misogyny, the megadeath. All of that is a mere external version of something inside. And then it extends even from that point out to nature and to animals. But it's all rooted inside oneself. And what's the cocktail? Obesity, anorexia, insomnia, hypertension, obsession with appearance. My God, you don't have to turn on the television. Obsession with appearance and cosmetic appearance. And then the fitness mania, which is nothing more than another form of sadism, hard-bodied, as Wilhelm Reich would have easily shown us. And do you notice the mechanicalistic, monotonous repetition of the way that they even present exercise? It's not done in a very yin or organic way. Even the exercise machines that they show you are demonic. And the message that they're sending you about what you think health is meant to be. Routine, mechanical, movements of the body, totally anti-organic and anti-feminine. And there's so many of those. Why? Because they're selling you a message. And the depression and the ADD and the delinquency and the addiction. And look what's buried in the middle of all of that. The chronic dependency, the key. You can't be anything unless somebody else has given you approval. And mostly you don't get the approval, so as the psychologists well know, look what then happens to us when we don't get it. Look what then becomes of us and what we start doing when we don't have that approval from somebody. Look what we turn ourselves into. Now, anxiety is an interesting word. It's used a lot. It's different than fear. Anxiety comes from the German word Angst. But the psychologists in Germany were saying, look, fear is the word that means when you're being attacked from outside. It's the emotion that you feel when there's a legitimate physical attack. Angst is very different. Angst is from within, when there's something about yourself that's in disorder or malaise. That needs to be borne in mind. What we're having today when we talk about anxiety disorders is all rooted in what I've been talking about. And then we have the cures, because of course we're not doing the healthy work to solve the problem. No. As I said, we poison ourselves with toxic foodstuffs full of contaminants and then seek respite for our terrible inner discomfort on a physical level from a leviathan that administers nothing more than further poisons to us in the name of our health. Isn't that a symptom of our psychosis? But we want that, because what's it all really based on? The doctor's another daddy. Are you feeling better now, darling? Oh, yes, doctor. You're feeling like hell, but don't irritate the doctor. Roll up the sleeve. They could tell you to do somersaults and bend over backwards and people will do it. Because that animus figure is very important. But a priest, pope, politician, doctor, tutor, you see, the whole 9 yards. The expert. Look, we're in submission to the expert. Everyone else is more powerful and more knowledgeable. And we've given our power away to the worst kind of sadists. Because these individuals themselves are not spiritually pure and clean and cannot rise up high to feel high. So their mentality is to push and artificially repress good people so they feel great. They're not actually doing anything to spiritually progress or mature, but they are doing a lot to hold you down, and that's how they get their feeling of greatness. The petty tyrant in your neighborhood does the same thing. The bully in school does the same thing. You see, anybody here has actually had to deal with psychotic people or schizophrenics or people? It's very difficult to tell those people that their thinking is deranged. They think they're perfectly normal. Partly, as I said, they've adjusted to reality as they see it, so they're not wholly to blame. But even in the worst chronic syndrome, you will find that you're wasting your time. You could roll out your soul like a red carpet, and they'll walk right on it. Because they are thinking you're the dummy. You're the dumbass. You got it wrong. As we saw, Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop from facing their souls. You've heard me put it differently. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop facing their shadow self. And that's an enormous problem. You won't face it, but you will project it on somebody else and curse them out and then destroy their innocent lives, or not so innocent, by your projections. That you can manage to do. Now, of course, this return to selfhood and the division, right, the divorce from all that is false, is very painful and traumatic to the ego of man, because the ego is well happy with all of that. The ego has made its home here, and now you're telling it to burn down its shack. Because look, I just built this thing. And therefore, hence, as I've been saying, the avoidance and the gimmicks and the denial and the projection and everything else that we're involved with. But as Friedrich Nietzsche said, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will often be lonely. And you will sometimes even be frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. The magician from the 19th century, Aleister Crowley, he puts it this way, talking in incredible language. Anyone who is forced from his own course, either through not understanding himself or through external imposition, comes into conflict with the order of the universe and suffers accordingly. So if there's stress and suffering in your life, there's a reason. As I said, those are red flags. Those are guardians coming and knocking on your door saying, hey, Part of the building is crumbling. Things are off. Your suffering is your guide. Your fear, your tension, your nightmares, you can't drug it out of existence. You can't medicate it. Well, you can, but it's, that's destruction. That's annihilation, is what you're basically doing. And more so, you're producing leviathans who prey upon you by doing that. When you accept that you can do something about it, and you see this, whenever suffering or anger or pain enters into your life, you listen to it. You let it wash over you. In the movie Dune, they talk about this from the books of Frank Herbert. There's many other movies and other art forms that talk about this, that explain this concept that I'm talking about. And once upon a time, it was the teachings of all yoga and magic and religion. This is what I'm talking about. Where you say, then teach me. I won't try to escape from you. You keep pestering me. I'm not going to run away from you anymore. Tell me why you're here. And slowly, if you're silent enough, forget about third eyes, develop a third ear. And listen very calmly and quietly and still to your angst and pain and suffering and sorrow. Don't medicate it out of existence or try to silence it, because it's got an amazing story to tell you. And you see, the God force in this universe is not going to turn its volume up to be heard. You have to turn your racket down. It's always talking. It's always there, symbolically and in other forms of communication. But we have to turn our noise down, and suddenly you'll hear it there. It's always playing in the background. The message of this Holy Spirit is personal exorcism. The personal exorcism of anything that contravenes the recognition of your own perfection and of your own value. Meaning what? Do yourself a break and lay off the hunting for spiritual perfection and enlightenment. You already have it. You just don't know you have it because there's a welter of self-induced and also externally induced prohibitions and inhibitions and weights upon your shoulders, keeping you from the understanding of your own perfection. Then when you're under that weight, you're actually running around looking for truth and for gurus and for sanity. The weight is keeping you from being it already. You're not going to achieve this state from an act of doing. At least not in the way that the Western world understands the concept of doing. It's a very Zen Taoist thing. It's more like undoing. Ultimately, it's about being. It's the difference between life and lifestyle. In that mystery of releasing from your... And analyzing. We have to do what we're doing right now sitting in this room. We have to analyze the factors that are holding us down, that are chaining us. You go, look, I want to go here, and I'm blaming myself, and I'm terribly punitive to myself, and I show a lot of anger and aggression towards other people because I think they're getting in my way, and I'm not aware that I'm carrying an incredible load. I'm a bloody pack mule for somebody or something. It's like a balloon, a big hot air balloon that's chained to the ground. If you release the chains, the balloon rises of its own accord, and the natural forces take right over. But we have been duped into thinking that we're imperfect and fallen and horrible and rotten, and that you're just a sinner. But the magus does not convert sinners, like these demagogues that we've been looking at. The magus, the shaman, awakens the ready. It's a totally different concept. You're already, the teacher to become. You're going to become the teacher. And when you're ready, the teacher awakens you. Not converting sinners for a paycheck. But the masters have said, like Krishnamurti, for instance, and Alan Watts, and other American versions of the same thing, and many teachers I can think of. But we have funded and paid for teachers and churches, and we've built leviathans running around to find out what is enlightenment. We've bought into every kind of nonsense to find out what is God, what is tradition, what is enlightenment. And you know something? It might boil down to something very simple. It might boil down to simply the process of independence, as against the collectivism. It might be freeing others from the slavery to your emptiness and need. I need you, I'm empty, I need you, you're empty, you need me. We call that love, and call that relationship. When you free another from that kind of soft tyranny, maybe that is a path to enlightenment. Maybe when you're in a relationship and you say, we are in a relationship together as two individuals, and when you look like you're becoming dependent, I don't back it up. I step back. And if you fall, you fall. But I will not become your prop so that you can live in absence of selfhood, because then I'm contravening the Holy Spirit. And when you see me doing it, you likewise warn me. And when we do that, we have a healthy relationship. So we're each other's mirror, but we're also each other's teacher. And perhaps it's also this, that when you are no longer emotionally affected, and I mean negatively or positively, by what any other person does, says, or thinks about you. So give it some thought, because it might be very, very simple. Vernon Howard put it this way: human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it, but those who do will become well. Until you end in your life all the things that are not true, you can forget about any type of enlightenment. At last, finally, the scientists are also are catching up. Dr. George W. Cryle of the Cleveland Laboratories announced that he had discovered at the heart of every living organism a tiny nucleus of energy all aglow, with temperatures ranging from 3,000 to 6,000 degrees of heat, which he called radiogens or hot points, precisely akin to the radiant energy of solar matter. Look at that, precisely akin to the radiant energy of solar matter. He affirmed that a tiny particle of the sun's power and radiance was lodged within the heart of every organic unit. If a mystic had said it, they go, he's crazy, he's on something. But a scientist is now saying it. Deepak Chopra addresses it. Photons, which is the highest form of physical light, come out of nowhere. They cannot be stored, they can barely be pinned down in time. And they have no home in space whatsoever. That is, light occupies no volume and has no mass. The similarity between a thought and a photon is very deep. Both are born in the region beyond space and time where nature controls all processes in that void which is full of creative intelligence. Well, in the early 1980s, thanks to the development of a sophisticated measurement device, a team of scientists demonstrated that the cells of all living beings emit photons of a rate up to approximately 100 units per second per square centimeter of surface area. They also showed that DNA was the source of the photon emission. The Mayan calendar, says Stephen Hanauer, is the only calendar known to be based on galactic cycles. The Mayans claimed that they created this calendar in order to monitor the light coming from the center of the galaxy and how it affected our DNA. We now know, through the work of Fritz Popp, that DNA not only absorbs light, but also emits light. DNA also appears to be the bridge between our physical and etheric bodies. Modern science now realizes that our DNA directly reflects our consciousness, making it possible for us to willfully change our DNA. Now that's magic, and that's true religion. Of course, the slave wants nothing to do with that. He's given away his power to others who do the thinking for him. Consciousness changed my DNA? You mean disease is changeable by consciousness? I don't want to believe that. It's external, it's a bug, it's a virus that's outside of me. I don't want to have anything to do with consciousness. I don't want to think. I don't want to change my consciousness. No. I believe what the FDA and the AMA tell me. But as a matter of fact, the opposite is true. The whole of matter can be transformed and changed by thinking. So when you see these stupid Lego sets that they show you the DNA tree floating in this hyperspace, that's malarkey. That's Hollywood, that's TV. No. The DNA is nothing but an expression of vibration, of energy, affected by thought. It's below thought. Your thinking will transform it. But my goodness, what would this philosophy now would do to the human race? Yesterday at the talk, somebody asked about the power of animals. They said they had some transformative experiences with animals. Well, of course you do. Because animals don't relate to you as persona or shadow. The animal's relationship to you is only to you as a self, even if you're not in selfhood. This is a miraculous thing. That's why people say it's healing to be around animals. Because the animal is not buying into all that persona stuff. The animal relates to a person as purely a self. So you learn about the mystery of selfhood and the mystery of humanness from animals and from what we laughingly call the inanimate. Now, I write about this a lot, so there's information on the websites. You have to fall in love with that which is not animate, right? Which you think is dead. You see, the problem with us is that human beings always want to spend most of their energy getting into relationships with other human beings. Because human beings give us back all the cues and affectations that our egos desire. But there's a whole world of stuff. When have you last talked to the light around you? When have you last addressed the air or the ocean? The sky has painted a different hue for you every 5 minutes. Do you notice it? Right? There's simplicity all around you. You can't say, is a dead rose more beautiful than a live rose? Nature is painting her picture for you every single day. There's a miracle going on everywhere. Have you looked at the skin of a fruit? Or, are you aware of the decaying buildings and the beauty in that? Or a rusted lamppost, or a guitar, or a piano, the intense beauty in that. No. We're all looking to human beings because we're so in need of dependency. And there's this whole other panoply out there. A whole incredible, magical, mystical tradition, a world. And we're not even aware of it. The beauty of animals and what they can teach us, you see? So the fully human being is a person who actually desists from a lot of his relationships with human beings, if you want my honest opinion, and becomes very, very aware of the inanimate from the moment that you open your eyes. The great philosopher Heidegger said this. In German, the word for thinking, danken, right, is exactly the same as dankan, which is to thank you, gratitude. Meaning that every thought you think should be an act of gratitude. Is it?